Okay, so uh, hi everyone, very welcome to InfoSecTrain, and this is our second last day of the training. And in the last session, we discussed a few things related to OSPF, right? Now we'll be continuing our session with the wireless parts. Okay, so let's start with our new topic, right? Which is fundamentals of wireless networks, right? Now, when I'm talking about wireless networks, what is wireless network and how they are different from wired network? Now, in a wired network, any two devices that need to connect, right? That need to communicate with each other, they must be connected by a wire, right? That's obvious, right? And the wire, it contains strands of metal or fiber optic material that run continuously from one end to other, right? Now, data that passes over the wire is bounded by its physical properties of the wire, right? Now, if you remember, we discussed about IEEE. So the IEEE set the standard 802.3. It defines strict guidelines for Ethernet wire itself. In addition, how devices may connect, how they send and receive the data over the wire, everything is written in that, right? So wired connection, they have been engineered with tight constraints. They have few variables that might prevent successful communication, and even the type and size of the wire strands, right? The number of twists the strands must make around each other over a distance, and maximum length of wire, we must adhere to the standard, right? Now, a wired network is essentially a bounded medium, right? We call it bounded medium or media, right? Now, data must travel over whatever path the wire or cable takes between two devices. If the cable goes around a corner or lies in the coil, the electrical signals used to carry the data must also go around the corner or around a coil, right? Because only two devices may connect over a wire, and only those two devices may send or transmit data, right? Even better, the devices, they may transmit data to each other simultaneously because they have a private or direct path to each other, right? Now, when we are talking about wired network, they also have some shortcomings, right? When a device is connected by a wire, it cannot move around very easily or very far. Yes, before a device can connect to a wired network, it must have a connector that is compatible with the one on which is on the end of the wire. So as the devices get smaller and more mobile, so it is just not practical to connect them to a wire, right? So we have wireless networks, right? Now, as its name implies, a wireless network, it removes the need to be tethered to a wire or cable, right? And here the convenience and mobility, they become paramount. So it enables the user to move around uh, at will and while staying connected to the network. So a user can bring along many different wireless devices that can all connect to the network easily and seamlessly, right? And wireless data must travel through free space without the constraints and protection of a wire. In the free space environment, many variables can affect the data and its delivery. To minimize the variables, wireless engineering efforts must focus on two things, right? There should be a common standard for wireless. So they made a standard. The standard is IEEE 802.11, right? And wireless coverage must exist in the area where devices are expected to use it, right? So these are the two things that are kept in mind, right? Now, when I'm talking about wireless LAN, what is wireless LAN? WLAN. Okay. Now, when we are talking about wireless LAN, so wireless LAN is what? Wireless LAN is the one that we are connected to. In local area network, we are connected wirelessly. Let's say our router, right? So what we have? We have our router. I'm connected to my router and I'm taking internet. I'm connected to the internet and then I'll be able to visit the websites. That is wireless LAN, isn't it? Perfect. Now, wireless communication, it takes place over a free space through the radio frequency signals. Yes. Now, the theory behind radio frequency signals can be complex, right? But uh, the thing is that the radio frequency is something through which our data is transferred to the router and back, right? So for now, just assume that one device, the transmitter, sends radio frequency signals to another device to the receiver, right? So let's let me paste a picture for that. So if you can see this image, in this we have unidirectional communication going on. Then bidirectional communication. Here bidirectional communication is going on, right? Great. So the transmitter in this first image, the transmitter can contact the receiver at any and all times, as long as uh, both the devices are turned to the same frequency or use the same scheme to carry the data between them. That's all simple, right? Now that is not really practical. Now, to fully leverage a wireless communication, data should travel in both directions, like the second image which is shown. Sometimes device A needs to send data to device B, while device B would like to take turns to send at other times, right? Now, because the two devices are using the same channel, right? Two phrases in the preceding sentence become vitally important. So what I said, two phrases I said, right? Let me write them. So the two phrases are take a turn, and second one, send it other times, right? These are the two things I said, right? Now with wireless communication, if multiple signals are received at the same time, they can interfere with each other, right? And the likelihood of interface increases as the number of wireless devices grows. Yes, that's what happens, right? Now when we are talking about the wireless devices and multiple devices, right? So four devices turn to be to the same channel, and what might happen if some or all of them transmit at the same time? This happens, right? So all the stake, we are waiting for turns to avoid interference, right? So it might remind you of the traditional Ethernet LAN which we discussed, where multiple hosts can connect to a shared media and share common bandwidth. To use the media effectively, all the hosts must operate in half duplex mode so that they try to avoid colliding with other transmission which are already in progress. Right? Now, the side effect is that no host can transmit and receive at the same time on a shared medium. So the wireless LAN is also similar because multiple hosts can share the same channel. They also share the airtime or access to that channel at any given time. But to keep everything clean, only one device should transmit at any specific time, right? So to content for use of channel devices based on 802.11 standard, they have to determine whether the channel is clear and available before transmitting anything. And at the most basic level, there is no inherent organization to a wireless medium or any inherent control over the number of devices that can transmit and receive frames, right? Any device that has a wireless network adapter can power up at any time and they can try to communicate. At a minimum, a wireless network should have a way to make sure that every device using a channel can support a common set of parameters. And beyond that, there should be a way to control which devices are allowed to use the wireless medium and the methods that are used to secure the wireless communications. Correct. Now, the thing is, we have basic service set. So this access point that you can see, right? At the heart of every BSS, basic service set, right? A wireless access point is there, right? And the access point, it works in infrastructure mode, right? Which means it offers the services that are necessary to form the infrastructure of a wireless network. Then this access point also establishes its basic service set over a single wireless channel, right? So the access point and the members of the basic service set must all use the same channel to communicate properly. Now, because the operation of BSS hinges on the access point, it relies on access point. So the basic service set is bounded by the area where the access point signal is unusable, right? Or like outside that, the access point signal is unusable. Inside that, it is usable, right? And that is known as basic service area, right? Or we also call it cell. Yes. So this circle around in this image, the circle around which you can see, that is cell, right? Now the cells, they can have different shapes, right? Depending on the antenna that is connected to the access point and on the physical surroundings that might affect the access point signals. Now the access point serves as a single point of contact for every device that wants to use the basic service set. It advertises the existence of the BSS so that devices can find it and try to join. And to do that, the access point uses something which is known as BSS ID. What is BSS ID? Now, BSS ID is what? BSS ID is the access point's MAC address. Here you can see in the form of MAC address it is. So that is the MAC address of the access point, right? Then in addition, what happens? The access point, it advertises the wireless network with a SSID, Now, what is SSID? It stands for Service Set Identifier, Wi-Fi name, right? So, SSID, it is a text string containing a logical name, right? So, think of this BSS ID as a machine readable name tag that uniquely identifies the basic service set ambassador, the access point. And SSID is a non-unique human readable name tag that identifies the wireless service, right? Let's say the name of my Wi-Fi is InfoSecTrain, right? So that is SSID of my router, right? Then the membership with basic service set, it is called an association, right? So a wireless device must send an association request to the access point, and the access point must either grant or deny the request. Once you are associated, or your device is associated, it becomes a client, or we call it 802.11 station, right? Of the BSS. What then? What after that? So as long as a wireless client remains associated with the BSS, most communications to and from the client must pass through the access point. So by using BSS ID as a source or a destination, data frames can be relayed to or from the access point. Right? Now you might be thinking that traffic has to why all client traffic has to traverse at the access point at all. Why can two clients not simply transmit data frames directly to each other and bypass the middleman? So if clients they are not allowed to communicate directly, then the whole idea of organizing and managing a basic service set is moot, right? So by sending data through the access point, the basic service set remains stable and under control. Now, even though the data frames they are meant to pass through an access point, right? So let's say like PC1 is there, PC1 is sending data, right? This PC1 is sending data to PC2, right? Through access point, through the router, it will be sent. Can other devices overhear the communication or is it secure? So when the data is passing through the access point, other devices in the same network area that are listening on the same channel can overhear the transmission, right? After all, wireless frames are not contained within a wire that connects a device to an access point directly. Frames are freely available over the air to anyone that is within the range to receive them. So if the frames are unencrypted, then anyone may inspect their contents, right? Only the BSSID value, which is contained within the frame, indicates that the intended sender or recipient is the access point, right? So that's a problem, right? If it is going unencrypted. So when we are talking about this word encrypt or encryption, what do you mean by encrypt or encryption, guys? Okay. Now what encryption means that converting your data into a format which is non-readable, or we can also call it gibberish format, right? So that is encryption. So if the data is encrypted, then it will be difficult for the attacker to read the data, but if it is unencrypted, then attacker might not be able to read the data. Now, the next thing is distribution system. So when we are talking about distribution system, right, like we saw in BSS it involves a single access point and no explicit connection into regular Ethernet network. In that setting, the access point and its associated clients make up a standalone network, right? Now, the access point's role at the center of the basic service set does not stop with managing the BSS. Sooner or later, wireless clients will need to communicate with other devices that are not members of the basic service set, right? Fortunately, you can uplink, right? So access point can also uplink into an Ethernet network because it has both wireless and wired capabilities. Now, the 802.11 standard, it refers to the upstream wired Ethernet as the distribution system for the wireless basic service set, right? Now, you can think of access point in this as a transitional bridge, right? So, where the frames of two dissimilar medium, they just are translated and then they are bridged at layer 2. So, what does that mean in layman terms? It, it means that the access point is in charge of mapping the VLAN here to an SSID, right? So the access point, it maps the VLAN, this VLAN 10 which is written, to the wireless LAN using SSID my network, right? And clients associated with the my network SSID will be connected to this VLAN 10. Now, this whole concept, can we extend it so that we can use multiple VLANs? We discussed about VLANs. So can we use it for for creating multiple VLANs here? Okay, let's see. So this can be used to map multiple SSID. And to do this, the access point must be connected to the switch by a trunk link that carries the VLANs, right? Now, if I do one thing, this one for distributed system, right? So what we can see here, VLANs 10, 20, and 30 are trunked to the access point over the distribution system, right? So the access point, it uses 802.1q tag, right? What was 802.1q? The protocol for VLANs, right? So it uses 802.1q to map the VLAN numbers to appropriate SSID, right? So let's say there is VLAN 10. So VLAN 10 is mapped to the SSID my network, right? So and VLAN 20, it is mapped to your network SSID. VLAN 30 is mapped to the SSID guest, right? So in effect, when an access point uses multiple SSIDs, it is trunking VLANs over the air and over the same channel, right? To wireless clients. And the clients must use appropriate SSIDs that has been mapped to respective VLANs when the access point was configured. So the access point then appears as multiple logical access points. One access point per basic service set. That's why you can see there are multiple access points, right? With a unique BSS ID for each, right? And when we are talking specifically, like we are learning CCNA, so we have to talk in terms of Cisco as well. So with Cisco access points, this is usually accomplished by incrementing the last digit of the MAC address for every SSID. So here we can see 21, 22, and 23. Yes, great. Now, even though an access point can advertise and support multiple logical wireless networks, each of the SSID covers the same geographic area. And the reason is that the access point uses the same transmitter, receiver, antenna, and channel for every SSID that it supports. And there is a big misconception as well, right? That multiple SSIDs can give an illusion of scale, right? So wireless clients cannot be distributed across multiple SSIDs. All those clients must share the same access point hardware and must contend for airtime on same channel, right? That is what? That is your distribution system. Next is extended service set. Now, extended, like one access point, same VLAN with two access point, right? So access point cannot cover an entire area where clients might be located, right? So let's say you might need wireless coverage throughout the entire floor of a business or hotel or hospital or other large building, right? So to cover more area than the single access point cell can cover, you simply need to add more access points and spread them geographically, like first floor, second floor, third floor, right? Different access points. Now, when access points are placed at a different geographic location, they can all be interconnected by a switched infrastructure, right? And the 802.11 standard calls this an extended service set, as you can see in the image as well, right? Now, the idea is to make multiple access points cooperate so that the wireless service is consistent and it is seamless from the client's perspective, right? Any SSID that is defined on one access point should be defined on all the access points in an extended service set. Otherwise, it would be very cumbersome and inconvenient for a client to be reconfigured each time it moves to a different access point cell. So if a person is here in this range right now, right, and this person is moving and reached at the access point two's location, right? So they don't have to, we have to make sure that they should not be configuring themselves again and again, right? Now in this image, you can notice that each cell, right, they have a unique BSS ID. Yes, but both the cells they share one common SSID my network, right? Regardless of a client's location within the extended service set, the SSID will remain the same, but the client can always distinguish one access point from another. Great. Now, in this extended service set, a wireless client can associate with one access point while it is physically located near that access point. If the client later moves to different location, it can associate with a different nearby access point automatically. So passing from one access point to another access point, it is called roaming, right? Yes. Now we have to just keep in mind that each access point it owns basic service set on its own channel. So to prevent interference between access points, as a client device roams from one access point to another, it must scan the available channels to find a new access point to roam toward, right? And the client is roaming from BSS to BSS and from channel to channel. That is the best example. So if I'm moving from one department to other department and uh, like I'm changing my BSS to other BSS, right? Automatically it should be connected. I should be connected to other network. Next is IBSS or Independent Basic Service Set. You might have heard about this. Like if you guys have learned wireless, then this one you might have heard. Okay. So usually a wireless network, what it does, it leverages access point for organization, control, and scalability, right? And sometimes that is not possible or convenient in an uh, impromptu situation, you can say, right? So, for example, let's say two people who want to exchange electronic documents at a meeting might not be able to find a BSS available, or might want to avoid having to authenticate to a production network. And many personal like in addition, many personal printers, they have the capability to print documents wirelessly without relying on a regular BSS or access point, right? So this 802.11 standard, it allows two or more wireless clients to communicate directly with each other and with no other means of network connectivity, right? And that is known as ad hoc wireless network, or IBSS, right? Perfect. Now, for this to work, one of the devices must take the lead and begin advertising on a network, right? And the necessary radio parameters, much like an access point would do, right? Any other device can join as needed. So IBSS is what these are meant to organized in an impromptu distributed fashion, right? So they do not scale well beyond 8 to 10 devices, but yeah, right? Now there are some these were some of the general topologies in wireless. Now there are other topologies as well. The first one is repeater. Now what is a repeater? So normally every access point in a wireless network has a wired connection back to the distribution system or switched infrastructure. So to extend wireless coverage beyond a normal access point cell footprint, additional access points and their wired connections can be added, right? Now, in many of the scenarios, it is not possible to run wired connection to a new access point because the cable distance is too big or too great to support Ethernet communication, right? So in that case, you can add an additional access point that is configured for repeater mode, right? What that does, a wireless repeater takes the signal it receives and repeats or retransmits it in a new cell area around the repeater. Now, the idea is to move the repeater out away as from the access point so that it is still within range of both access point and distant client. Now, if the repeater has a single transmitter and receiver, right? How many channels it will use to communicate or operate? So it will operate on the same channel that the access point is using, right? And it can create the possibility that the access point signal will be received and retransmitted by the repeater only to be received again by the access point, having the effective throughput because the channel will be kept busy twice as long as before. Now, as a remedy, some repeaters they can use two transmitters and receivers to keep the signal original and repeated signals isolated from different channels. So, one transmitter and receiver pair is dedicated to signals in the cell, while the other pair is dedicated to signals in the repeater's own cell. Next, next is workgroup bridge. What is bridge? How will you define? So, suppose that you have a device that supports a wired Ethernet link, but it is not capable of having a wireless connection, right? So, for example, let's say some mobile medical devices, right? They might be designed with only a wired connection. So, while it is possible to plug the device into an Ethernet connection when needed, a wireless connection would be much more practical. Then you can use workgroup bridge to connect the device wi wired network adapter to a wireless network. Yes. So rather than providing a BSS, basic service set for wireless service, a workgroup bridge becomes a wireless client of the basic service set. So workgroup bridge acts as an external wireless network adapter for the device that has none. So in this image, we can see that access point provides a BSS, basic service set, right? Client A is a regular wireless client, while client B associated with the access point through a workgroup bridge, right? So there are two types of workgroup bridge, right? Universal and just a normal work group bridge, right? Now, universal workgroup bridge, it is a single wired device that can be bridged to a wireless network, right? Now, the only WGB, that's why WGB is written because it is a Cisco proprietary implementation which allows multiple wired devices to be bridged to a wireless network. Now, the next thing is outdoor bridge. What do you mean by outdoor bridge? Now, the thing is, we can configure an access point to act as bridge to form a single wireless link from one local area network to another over a long distance. Outdoor bridge links are commonly used for connectivity between buildings or between cities. So if the local area networks at two locations need to be bridged, a point to point bridge link can be used, right? One access point configured in bridge mode is needed on each end of wireless link, right? So special purpose antennas are normally used with the bridges to focus their signals in one direction toward the antenna of the access point at the far end of the link, right? And this does what? It maximizes the link distance as well, right? Now, this is called if I tell you exactly what this is called, this is outdoor bridge, but this is point to point outdoor bridge. But sometimes what happens, the local area networks at multiple sites need to be bridged together. So a point to multi-point bridged link allows a central site to be bridged to several other sites. So if you can see, we have local area network A, local area network B, and then there is central one, right? So the central site bridge is connected to an omnidirectional antenna, such that its signal is transmitted equally in all directions so that it can reach the other sites simultaneously. And the bridges at each of the other sites can be connected to directional antenna which is aimed at the central site, right? That is point to multi-point scenario. Next one is mesh network. Now you guys might be knowing about the topologies in LAN, right? That is uh, like mesh topology is there also, right? So when we talk about mesh network in LAN, wireless LAN, what it can be? Like in Ethernet or local area network, which is wired local area network, what is a mesh network? How will you define how it looks like? What happens like this? There are multiple devices, right? One, two, three, four, right? So all the devices are connected to each other directly. Yes. Now the advantage of mesh network is that any device is directly connected and there are more redundant links, right? So if let's say this is PC1 and this is PC2, PC1 wants to send data to PC2, so PC1 can send it directly. But if this link fails between PC1 and 2, PC1 can send it with the help of PC3. So it will send it to 3 and 3 will forward it to 2, right? So more redundant paths are there. Yes. Now, in wireless, how it is? So, to provide wireless coverage over a very large area, it is not always practical to run Ethernet cabling to every access point that would be needed. Instead, you could use multiple access points configured in mesh mode, right? So, in a mesh topology, wireless traffic is bridged from access point to access point, right? In a daisy chain fashion, right? Using another wireless channel. Yep. Now, mesh access points can leverage dual radios, one using a channel in one range of frequency and one a different range, right? And each mesh access point usually maintains a BSS on one channel, right? With which wireless clients can associate, right? So client traffic is then usually bridged from access point to access point over other channels as a backhaul network, right? Now at the edge of mesh network, the backhaul traffic bridge to the wired LAN infrastructure, right? What is backhaul traffic? Now, when I'm talking about backhaul traffic, right? So what backhaul traffic is, backhaul, the original definition of backhaul was to transmit a telephone call or data beyond its normal destination point and then back again in order to utilize available personals like operators, agents, or etc. Or a network equipment not available as the destination location, right? So let's say depending on distances and service arrangement, it might be cheaper to send a telephone call on a private line to a location way beyond the destination and then dial up the destination, which is back in other direction. So what we are doing, we are relocating the traffic from a mobile base station to a cell tower. That is also backhaul, right? That is also backhaul technique, right? That is the meaning of backhaul. Yes. So that's what backhaul network is in mesh topology, right? Now, in this image, there is mesh topology with Cisco access points. You can build a mesh network indoors and outdoors, right? And the mesh network runs its own dynamic routing protocol to work out the best path for backhaul traffic to take across the mesh access points. Now, the next thing is RF, and it stands for radio frequency. Okay, now to send data across a wired link, an electrical signal is applied at one end and it is carried to the other end. The wire itself is continuous and conductive, so the signal can propagate rather easily, right? A wireless link has no physical strands of anything to carry the signal along. How then can the electrical signal be sent across the air or free space, right? So let's take example for that. So let's say there are two peoples. So two people standing far apart. One person wants to signal something to other, and they are connected by a long or somewhat loose rope, right? Now the rope represents the free space. The sender at one end decides to lift his end of rope high and hold it there so that the other end of the rope will also rise and notify the partner, right? So after all, if the rope is a wire, let's say, or rope were a wire, he knows that he could apply a steady voltage at one end of the wire and it would appear at the other end, right? Now the rope falls back after a tiny distance and the receiver never notices a change. So what happened, the sender thought that I will lift the rope from here, so rope will be lifted here as well. But it didn't happen. Rope was lifted till here, and after that, the same thing. So receiver didn't see anything, right? So now the sender tries different strategy. He cannot push the rope, but when he begins to wave it up and down and in a steady, regular motion, a curious thing happens. A continuous wave pattern appears along with the entire length of the rope. The sender sent the information like this, and the waves actually travel from the sender to the receiver, we can see, right? So in free space, a similar principle occurs. The sender can send an alternating current into a section of wire which sets up moving electric and magnetic fields so that it propagate out, right? So the electrical and magnetic field travel along together and they are always at right angles to each other, right? So the signal must keep on changing or alternating by cycling up and down, right? So to keep the electrical and magnetic fields cycling and pushing ever outward. Now, when we are talking about electromagnetic waves, they do not travel in a straight line, right? What they do, they travel by expanding in all direction away from the antenna. So if I give you like a visual image of it, think of dropping a pebble into a pond when the surface is still. Where it drops in, the pebble sets the water surface into a cyclic motion. The waves that uh, result begin small and expand outwards, only to be replaced by new waves. So in free space, the electromagnetic waves expand outward in all three dimensions. This is how it moves out, right? So this image is showing a simple idealistic antenna that is a single point at the end of the wire. The waves produced expand outward in a spherical shape, and the waves will eventually reach the receiver in addition to many other locations in other directions. Now, at the receiving end of the wireless link, this process is reversed. As the electromagnetic waves they reach the receiver's antenna, they induce an electrical signal. If everything works right, the received signal will be a reasonable copy of the original transmitted signal, right? So the electromagnetic waves involved in wireless link can be measured and described in several ways, right? And one fundamental property is the frequency of the wave, the number of times the signal makes one complete up and down cycle, right? So that shows how a cycle of wave can be identified. Then a cycle can begin as signal rises from the center line, falls through the center line, and rises again to meet the center line, right? So we all have seen this, this one. Yes, the sine theta, cos theta, their graph, right? So this is a complete cycle, right? From here till here. Now, a cycle can also be measured from the center of one peak to the center of next peak. No matter where you start measuring a cycle, this signal must make a complete sequence back to its starting position, where it is ready to repeat the same cyclic pattern, right? Now, this thing, like from this peak to this peak, right? This is called a cycle completed, right? Let's say the frequency is 4 cycles per second, right? That means the frequency will be 4 hertz, right? Now, suppose that 1 second has elapsed, right? This is 1 second. So till here, starting from the 1, there is 1 second, right? Now, frequency, it can vary over a wide variety or a very wide range. So as frequency increases by orders of magnitude, the numbers can become quite large, right? So it can be like, if I talk about hertz, so it means cycles per second, right? Now, if I talk about, like, I write hertz, it means cycles per second, right? If I talk about kilohertz, right? So it means 10,000, 1000 hertz, right? Then if I'm talking about megahertz, right? So it is, now there are gigahertz as well. So gigahertz means 1 000 0 000 and 000 hertz. This much. Yes. As we can see here, there are access points, right? And their wireless standards. Yep. Now, when we are talking about access points, we know what is access point, what are wireless standards, what is a standard, why you need a standard, guys. Now, wireless standards are needed because we want multiple devices to communicate or work with each other, right? So for that, all of them should be following the same standard. If there are different standards, multiple standards, and devices are following multiple standards, so one device of one company won't be able to communicate with the other device, right? So it might be obvious that wireless devices and access points should all be capable of operating on the same band, right? Let's say we are talking about a 5 gigahertz wireless phone can communicate only with an access point that offers Wi-Fi service on 5 gigahertz channels, right? And in addition, the devices and access points, they must also share a compatibility with the parts of 802.11 standard they support, right? So 802.11 Wi-Fi standard, it evolves and develops new amendments with new functionality get proposed. Now these amendments are known by 802.11, which is followed by a one or two letter suffix until they are accepted and rolled up to next generation of the complete standard. Even then, it is common to see amendment suffixes still used to distinguish specific functions. Now, you should be aware of several amendments that define important characteristics like data rates, methods used to transmit and receive data, right? All those things you should know. Now, these are the basic characteristics of some 802.11 amendments, right? Now, the thing is, they are not mutually exclusive. Wireless client devices and access points can be compatible with one or more amendments, right? A client and an access point can communicate only if they both support and agree to use the same amendment. So when you look at the specifications for a wireless device, you may find supported amendments listed in a single string, separated by slashes, right? Like you might have seen a device that supports uh, 802.11 B slash G, right? Will support both, right? 802.11b or and 802.11 G, right? The one that supports 802.11 B, G, A, and AC, right? It will support all of them, right? 802.11b, 802.11g, 802.11n, ACA, right? So you should be familiar with this table so that you know which bands a device can use based on the 802.11 amendment support. Right. Now, if a device can operate on both bands, right? Let's say I have written this B and G. So if it can operate on both the bands, how does it decide which band to use? Access points, they can usually operate on both bands simultaneously to support any clients that might be present on each band. However, wireless clients, they typically associate with an access point on one band at a time while scanning for potential access points on both bands. So the band used to connect to access point is chosen according to the operating system, wireless adapter driver, and other internal configuration. So a wireless client can initiate an association with an access point on one band and then switch to other band if the signal conditions are better there, right? That's why you are able to communicate on different bands, right? Now in open space, radio frequency signals, they propagate or reach further on 2.4 gigahertz band, then on the 5 gigahertz band. They also tend to penetrate indoor walls or an object easier at 2.4 gigahertz than 5 gigahertz. So 2.4 gigahertz, it's commonly more crowded with wireless devices, right? So remember that only three non-overlapping channels are available. So the chances of other neighboring access points using the same channel is greater, right? And the 5 gigahertz band has many more channels available to use. So it makes the channels less crowded and experience less interference. Now, next thing is analyzing Cisco wireless architecture. So we have autonomous access point architecture. Now, we discussed about autonomous systems, own rule regulation, correct? Now, when we are talking about the autonomous systems, like the internet service provider, they have autonomous systems, right? So they are now putting they're just breaking their IP network into smaller parts and then giving the IPs to different people, right? Now we have autonomous access point, right? Now what is the access point, right? What is the function of access point? So the primary function of an access point is to bridge wireless data from the air to a normal wired network, right? And an access point can accept connections from a number of wireless clients so that they can become the members of the LAN, local area network, as if the same clients were using the wired connections, right? Now access points, they act as a central point of access, right? Controls client access to the wireless local area network. Autonomous access point is self-contained, right? So it is having both wired and wireless hardware so that the wireless client associations can be terminated onto a wired connection locally at the access point. And the access points and their data connection must be distributed across the coverage area and across the network, right? So autonomous access points, they offer one or more fully functional standalone BSS, basic service set, and they are also a natural extension of a switched network, right? Connecting wireless service set identifiers to wired virtual LANs at the access layer. Now in this image, if you can see, this basic architecture is there. Even though only four access points are shown across the bottom, a typical enterprise network, it consists of thousands or hundreds of access points. Can you believe that? Now, if an autonomous access point needs to become the part of the network, right? Then what? exactly this it need to do, or need what it exactly needs. Now we can see the SSIDs here, right? There are two SSIDs, right? WLAN 100 and WLAN 200. Now these they correspond to wired VLANs 100 and 200, which is here. Now the VLANs must be trunked from the distribution layer switch to the access layer, where they are extended further over a trunk link to the access point, right? Now an autonomous system access point, it offers a short and simple path for data to travel between the wireless and wired network. Data has to travel only through the access point to reach the network on the other side, right? So from here the data goes, let's say. Now two wireless users that are associated to the same autonomous access point can reach each other through the access point without having to pass up into the wired network. So if there are two devices connected to this access point, they can communicate. The data does not have to go forward here. Yes. So an access point must also be configured with management IP addresses. So here you can see it's written management IP addresses 10.10.10.10, right? So that you can remotely manage it, right? Then after all, you configure SSIDs, VLANs, radio frequency parameters like the channel and the transmit power to be used. The management address is not normally part of any of the data VLANs, so a dedicated management VLAN must be added to the trunk link to reach the access point, right? Like here there is VLAN 10. Each access point must be configured and maintained individually unless you leverage a management platform like uh, if you have heard about Cisco Prime Infrastructure. From there you can manage. Or there is one more, Cisco DNA Center. Now the thing is, the data and management VLANs, they may need to reach every autonomous access point. Now the network configuration and efficiency can become worse as the network is scaling. So let's say you will likely want to offer the same SSID on many access points so that wireless clients can associate with that SSID in most any location, or while roaming between any two access points. And you also might want to extend the corresponding VLAN to each and every access point so that the clients they do not have to request new IP address for every association. So the client is moving from here to here, just he should be able to move, and no new IP address should be given, and no uh, like the association authentication should also not happen, right? So SSIDs and their VLANs must be extended at layer 2. So you should consider how they are extended throughout the switch network, right? So here, this shaded portion which you can see here, this one, right? What it shows an example of single VLANs extent in the data plane. So it is working top to bottom. and it follow VLAN 100 as it reaches through the network. VLAN 100 is routed within the distribution layer, and it must be carried over trunk links to the access layer switches and then to each autonomous access point, right? And in effect, VLAN 100, it must extend end to end across the whole infrastructure, right? So that is something that which is actually considered to be a bad practice, right? So that might sound straightforward until you have to add new VLAN and configure every switch and access point in your network to carry and support it. Even worse happens, suppose your network has some redundant links between each layer of switches. The STP running on each switch becomes a vital ingredient to prevent bridging loops from forming and corrupting network. And for these reasons, client roaming across autonomous access points is typically limited to layer 2 domain only. As you can see here, this is Cisco Meraki Cloud, right? So autonomous access points, they need quite a bit of configuration and management, right? You might have understood this, right? It was very difficult, and uh, lots of things were there, right, to understand. Yes, to help manage more and more autonomous access points as the wireless network grows, you could place an access point management platform, right? Like as I said, Cisco Prime Infrastructure in the central location within the enterprise. The management platform would need to be purchased, configured, and maintained too, right? So for that, a simpler approach is cloud-based access point architecture, right? And this is the simpler approach where access point management function is pushed out of the enterprise and into the internet cloud, right? Now, Cisco Meraki is cloud-based and it offers centralized management of wireless, switched, and security networks built from Meraki products. Like through the cloud networking service, you can configure and manage access points, monitor the wireless performance and activity, right? Generate reports and many things you can do. So it can be deployed automatically once you register with the Meraki cloud. Each access point will contact the cloud when it powers up and will self configure, right? From that point on, you can manage the access point through the dashboard, right? Now in this image, you can notice that the network is arranged identically to that of autonomous access point network. The reason is that the access points in a cloud-based network all are autonomous too. The most visible difference is that all of the access points are managed, controlled, and monitored centrally from a cloud. Here we can see that it's written Cisco Meraki Cloud, right? And from the cloud, you can push out upgrades and configuration changes to the access point in the enterprise. And this also adds, like this Cisco Meraki Cloud, it also adds the intelligence needed to automatically instruct each access point on which channel and transmit power levels to use, right? It can also collect information from the all access points about the things like radio frequency interface, right? If there is any rogue or unexpected wireless devices that are overheard, and wireless usage statistics, right? So there are lots of things you should observe about the cloud-based architecture, right? Now the data path from the wireless network to the wired network is very short, right? The autonomous access point links the two networks, right? Data to and from wireless clients does not have to travel up into the cloud and back. So the cloud, it is used to bring management functions into data plane. So there are two paths, right? One for data traffic, another for management traffic. right? As here it is written data, right? So there are two functions as well, right? So there is control plane and there is data plane as well. Now, control plane is what traffic used to control, configure, manage, and monitor the access point itself. Right? Data plane, end user traffic passing through the access point. Right? That is the one. The next thing that is wireless LAN controller deployments. Right? Now, in this, suppose you want to deploy a WLC. So when the functions of an autonomous access point are divided, the access point hardware is known as lightweight access point and it performs only the real-time operation. The lightweight access point gets its name because the code image and the local intelligence are stripped down or lightweight, right? The management functions they are usually performed on a wireless LAN controller, which control many lightweight access points. Right. So when you want to deploy a wireless LAN controller to support multiple lightweight access points on your network, where you should put the wireless LAN controller. So there is a concept of split MAC, right? Now split MAC can be applied in many ways, right? Split MAC architecture. Now each architecture places the wireless LAN controller in different location within the network. A choice that also affects how many WLCs might be needed to support the number of access points required. Yes. Now, one approach is to locate the wireless LAN controller in a central location that you can maximize the number of access points joined to it. And that is usually called unified or centralized, right? WLC deployment, right? And it tends to follow the concept that most of the resources users needs to reach are located in a central location, such as data center or the internet. Traffic to and from wireless users. It will be traveling over tunnels that reach into the center of the network near the core, right? Then a centralized WLC also provides a convenient place to enforce security policies that affect all wireless users, right? So if I show you the centralized one, right? This is the centralized one, right? So there is unified WLC, right? Centrally it is managing, right? So your network might have more access points, many more. A large enterprise network might have thousands of access points connected to its access layer. Scalability then becomes an important factor in the centralized design. Then there is cloud-based deployment as well, right? Cloud-based, right? Where it is the location. So for small campuses or distributed branch locations where the number of access points is relatively small in each, the wireless LAN controller it can be co-located with a stack of switches, right? And that is known as embedded WLC deployment because the controller is embedded within the switching hardware, right? Then the embedded one. that is the next one. So this is also for small, mid-size or multi-site branch locations, right? So you don't want to invest in dedicated wireless LAN controllers at all. So WLC function can be co-located with an access point that is installed in the branch, right? And this is known as mobility express deployment, right? And then there is this, the autonomous, no WLC, no access point, nothing, not applicable to autonomous, right? Next thing, Cisco access point modes. So many access points in Cisco, they can operate in either autonomous or lightweight mode environment, depending on which code image is loaded and run, right? So from the wireless LAN controller, you can also configure a lightweight access point to operate in one of the like special purpose modes, right? Like local, right? So local is what? The default lightweight mode that offers one or more functioning basic service set on a specific channel, right? So during times that is not transmitting, it is not transmitting, the access point will scan the other channels to measure the level of noise, measure the interference, discover the rogue devices, and match against intrusion detection systems and events. Now in monitor, what happens? The access point does not transmit at all, but its receiver is enabled to act as a dedicated sensor. So the access point checks for IDS events, it detects rogue access points, and it determines the position of stations through location-based services, right? Then there is Flex Connect, right? Flex Connect means an access point at a remote site can locally switch traffic between the S service site identifier and a VLAN if its tunnel to the wireless LAN controller is down and if it is configured to do so. So we have to make sure that it is configured to do all those things as well. Sniffer mode, right? So an access point dedicates its radius to receive 802.11 traffic from other sources, much like a sniffer or packet capture device. So the captured traffic is then forwarded to a PC running network analyzer software such as Wireshark, right, where it can be further analyzed. Then rogue detector is there. So rogue detector mode access point will dedicate itself to detecting rogue devices by correlating the MAC addresses that are heard on the wired network with those which are heard over the air, right? So rogue devices are those that appear on both the networks. Bridge, right? So bridge means an access point, it becomes a dedicated bridge, point to point or point to multi-point between two networks, right? So two access points in bridge mode can be used to link two locations separated by a distance, right? Multiple access points in bridge mode can form an indoor or outdoor mesh network, right? Then flex plus bridge. So in flex plus bridge, flex connect operation is enabled on a mesh access point, right? Then SE connect, the access point dedicates its radius to spectrum analysis on all wireless channels. So you can remotely connect a PC which is running uh, software such as MetaGeek, Channelizer, or Cisco Spectrum Expert to the access point to collect and analyze the spectrum analysis data to discover source of interference. Now, next thing is securing wireless networks, right? So, what is security? Can you guys tell me what is security? Why we need security? Security means that your data is not read by anyone else. The data during the transition, it is not tampered or it is not corrupted, and data is available for everyone, right? That connection will be called sec a secure connection. Yes or no? If I'm sending data to someone so that the data is reaching to that person without someone else getting the knowledge of the data, and the data is not even tampered during the transit, and data is available whenever you are asking for it. That is called a secure connection. Yes, perfect. Now, if we are using like wireless network, so you have to first discover the basic service set and then request permission to associate with it. The client should be authenticated by some means before they can become functioning members of the wireless LAN, right? So suppose that your wireless network connects to corporate resources where confidential information can be accessed. In that case, only devices known to be trusted and expected should be given access. Guest users, if they are permitted at all, should be allowed to join a different guest wireless local area network where they can access non-confidential or public resources, right? Rogue clients which are not expected or welcome should not be permitted to associate or connect. After all, they are not affiliated with the corporate network, and they are likely to be unknown devices that happen to be within range of your network, right? So to control access, wireless networks can authenticate the client's devices before they are allowed to associate, right? So when we are authenticating, what authentication means, we always do authentication. We go to ATMs for withdrawing money. That is what, that is authentication, right? Now the thing is that authentication means identifying a person who he or she is claiming to be. So if I'm claiming that my name is Ashish Dhyani, right? So that is authentication for me, right? So how I will authenticate in front of, let's say, ATM? I will give my card and enter the PIN number. Then I will be authenticated, right? Wherever any website where I have my accounts, I will enter the username and password. Then authentication will happen. Yes, that is authentication. So if there is a client coming to access point, you connect to your router. So you say, like, who are you? The access point says, you say, I'm Joe user. He says, okay. Then, if you are authenticating a wireless access point, so you say, who are you? The access point say, I'm access point one. These are my management frames. You say, okay, right? So you also have to check that if it is correct or not, right? You are connecting to the correct access point or not. Now, next is message privacy, right? Now, the client in this figure, which you can see, must authenticate it before joining the wireless network. It might also authenticate the access point and its management frames after it associates, right? But before it is itself authenticated, the client's relationship with the access point might become much more trusted. But the data passing to and from the client is still available to the eavesdroppers, right, on the same channel. So to protect data privacy on the wireless network, the data should be encrypted, right, for its journey through the free space, right? And you can encrypt the data payload in each wireless frame just prior to being transmitted. So before transmitting, you should just encrypting the data. Now the thing is, when I'm encrypting the data, right? Let's say the two people are communicating with each other, right? These two people. So what I'm doing, I'm encrypting the data. This is the data. So let's say this one, right? I sent this data. Now there is an attacker. That attacker is not able to read what is inside. But what if this attacker removes the data and puts something else inside, like www.hacker.com, right? A fake website. And the data will be sent to my friend. My friend will think I sent him a link, so that he or she will click on the link and done, right? That is the message integrity lost, right? So the original data that I'm sending, it should be, it is, if it is like this, let's say this is the data. Now if uh, like the data is being sent, so there should be hashing of the data used, right? The data should be sent in a hashed format, right? Now what is hashed format? Hashing means that you are converting your data into a format which can never be reverted back, and it is a thing which is known as it gives you a string which that, and that string is known as hash. Clear? So that is how you maintain the integrity of the data, right? So that was it for today. And thank you so much, guys. Thank you for joining in, and see you guys tomorrow.